Here, I'll run this idea by you because I've kind of been thinking about a minimum wage for corporations and large businesses and like abolishing the minimum wage for small businesses because it's just such a different environment. Like a corporate, I have 10,000 employees environment is so different from the mom and pop restaurant where we have like 5 people working for us.
I just don't think there should be a minimum wage for anyone, to be honest,
Right.
because I view
Well,
it.
but you have the power with the corporations that will take advantage of that and start literally paying people $2 an hour. Well, there's only 2 things that get you labeled a fascist in my book, and that
What are
is
they?
limiting voting rights and the gold standard. So,
You don't like the gold standard?
yeah, no, I hate the gold standard. So,
Okay. I don't have a hard position on that, but I do think
oh,
fiat
okay.
currency.
I
I
set
do
it up.
think
I didn't
fiat
know. I didn't know if
currency
you were a
is
gold
deeply
standard
flawed,
guy.
though. I
Right.
don't know. I mean, one of my policy idols is Milton Friedman, and I don't believe he supported the gold standard.
No, yes.
So I would tend to say whatever Milton thought was right.
Everyone uses that quote about inflation from Milton Friedman, but they only use half of the quote. So they say inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, but then they cut it off there. But he continues to say if the money supply grows at the same rate as production grows, you won't get inflation. Actually, if production grows faster than you inflate the money supply, you'll get deflation. So,
Yeah,
you
well,
know,
so the other thing is too, like, the definition of what inflation is has changed over time in different
yes,
economic
totally,
circles.
totally.
So sometimes quotes about inflation are actually describing, like, some economists used to simply define inflation as an increase in the money supply, not an increase in the price level. And so when you look at old quotes about inflation, it can get kind of confuddled.
Look at this, Brad. You're bringing up the celebrity suicide thing. You're not in favor of the gold standard. I feel like
I mean,
you're a
but to be
great
honest, I'm not
guest
doing that on
here.
purpose.
The
Yeah.
what
I
are-
am not in favor. I want to be clear though. I'm not in favor of like runaway fiat currency untethered to anything either. I think that's clearly not working out great.
Well, obviously you can't spend to infinity. A lot of people mischaracterize, I think, MMT unfairly. They say that MMT is in favor of unlimited spending when MMT very clearly states that inflation is the limiting factor in spending.
So the problem with that though is that either MMT states what you're saying it doesn't state, or it states nothing new. Right? The idea that you can spend until you can't and there's inflation is not a new theory. Right. But so
But a lot of people do debt to GDP though, obviously. They think that's the limit. They're like, you can't get up to a certain amount of debt to GDP, but a lot of other nations. Look, our audience hates when we talk about this stuff. So, but
see, I could talk about this stuff all day.
I know. When you said you were an economics
so
guy,
the fundamental problem I have with a lot of MMT people is that the basic truth of economics is scarcity, and some of them really don't believe in scarcity as a concept.
And I don't like those people either. I would like to kick them out of the MMT community. Like all the
Are you part of the MMT community?
All the commies must go. Yeah.
Oh,
well, but
no.
I do.
That's why I can't believe you, Adam. You can't believe you let him slide on the MMT saying nothing new.
Well,
Because-
I
well,
didn't.
no,
what
what I
do you
said
mean?
is,
Hold on a
it
second. We're having
either-
the conversation now, Sitch. I didn't let him
It
slide.
either
What are you
says-
talking about?
Depending on how you interpret MMT, it either says something untrue or something new.
Well, hold on.
Is what I'm saying.
What
or
is
something not new.
What is the untrue thing that it says?
Well, the version that you're saying is a caricature of that you can just spend unlimited money
God, I
is
love it.
obviously not true. Now, there are some MMT people who say things that imply that. But if I take, and I agree with you, the actual MMT theory does say to the point where you have inflation.
Right.
But then that's not a new theory. That's not a new thought.
Yes. Yeah. I agree with you.
So I'm saying
what
it
is the new
either
thing,
says something
Adam?
untrue or something that's not actually novel.
What's the new part of MMT, Adam? Like, what is new? What is MMT? Why is it important? What does it tell us?
MMT changes the money story. The traditional neoclassical economics money story is that taxation is the limiting factor for spending. MMT says that that's not true. That
Well, but so the reason
inflation
that's
is
not
the
new is that
limiting
inflation
factor.
is a form of taxation. Inflation is a stealth tax. It's
Well,
just
but
indirect.
you got to admit it's a different form of
Well, that yeah, but that's
taxation.
not.
So
I think what I'm saying is that for MMT, before MMT, the idea was that the government needs to tax money from people and then turn around and spend that money. And MMT is saying, no, you have it backwards.
right, spending comes first. That's what's
Right. The
new.
government doesn't actually need to tax money at all.
Right.
Really, and you shouldn't even conceptualize it that way. That the only limiting factor is inflation, not debt, not taxation.
So that's just indirect taxation. It literally, because
But
if you're just
hold
gonna,
on a second. Let's just
Well, wait,
let's make it
could
clear. There's
be.
two different types of taxation here. There's to actually taking your money from your paycheck, and there's this other thing that you're calling inflation. Let's just separate those two because we're not talking about the inflation.
but we can separate them. But if I'm getting poorer because you're increasing the amount of taxes that are coming out of my paycheck, or I'm getting poorer because you're devaluing what my paycheck can buy me, either way, I'm getting poorer, and resources are being redistributed from the private sector so that the more can be allocated in the government sector.
But
It is a difference.
But if you can
it
do
is
government
still-
spending, if you can do government spending without inflation being obnoxious, you're not taxing there.
So you're saying inflation will be zero? Government spending with taxes and
obviously.
Well,
inflation
you don't
at
want
zero.
it to be. You don't want inflation to be zero.
Yeah, you
But
don't want it to be zero,
any
but-
inflation is a form of wealth confiscation.
Yeah, but it's better for the economy overall to have some amount of inflation. You want like what is it, the 1 to 2% range of inflation?
There's an argument for that, but that doesn't mean it's not a trade-off. It doesn't
Is
mean
it?
it
No, it
doesn't
is.
have,
Of course, of course, everything is a trade-off.
Brad,
And you
you
can.
it doesn't.
I
but
think
so-
to be, I was just, let me
Go
say, I
ahead,
think to
one
be
at a time.
clear, you can disagree with government spending. You can disagree with sort of pushing government spending because it will create more inflation. That's fine. I think the only point was just that the MMT point was just that, yes, the limitation is inflation. It's not taxation. It's not debt, which is a new idea, in my opinion. So,
Brad, are you in favor of wealth confiscation for like police and fire, those kinds of things?
Yeah, I'm a classical liberal. I'm not an anarchist. So I
Okay.
think you have to have some degree of government. I do believe in the protection of person, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, blah,
So-
blah, blah.
well,
So
I would
yes,
say-
I think there should be basic taxation to
I would
fund basic public services.
I would say 1 to 2% inflation. I would equate that in the realm of fire and police. Like you're just going to have a much safer, more productive environment if you have that. We could probably disagree on that and argue about it. But if you're in favor of taxation for fire and police, I would say this invisible tax of inflation at 1 to 2% is kind of the same thing. It's producing a kind of safe,
I guess
pro-business environment.
It's just another way to pay for it, if that's what you're saying, rather
Sure.
than taxing. I mean, and I guess I'd have to think about whether it's better or worse. I don't know. I guess what I reject is the idea that it's just some MMT people, and it doesn't sound like you're doing this, but they act like, well, really, the sky's unlimited. We can have all the nice things.
I hate those
No
people,
trade-offs.
Brad. I want to just shake them by the collar. Why
But
are
if
you
you're
saying that?
If you're simply arguing that it's better to pay for the costs of government spending through inflation than it is through taxation in the traditional sense, that's a conversation we can have. My only point is you absolutely have to pay for it somehow because the government does not have a magical horn of plenty. It cannot create resources out of thin air.
I agree.
And resources are scarce, and so ultimately, directly or indirectly, you can't just. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Is all I'm saying.
Here, I'll run this idea by you because I've kind of been thinking about a minimum wage for corporations and large businesses and like abolishing the minimum wage for small businesses because it's just such a different environment. Like a corporate, I have 10,000 employees environment is so different from the mom and pop restaurant where we have like 5 people working for us. And I feel like you could get a lot of innovation out of small business if small businesses just didn't have a minimum wage.
I just don't think there should be a minimum wage for anyone, to be honest, because I view
But you have the power with the corporations that will take advantage of that and start literally paying people $2 an hour. So I don't know that you can go there.
They have competitive labor markets. That's the thing. You can't drive by a McDonald's right now without seeing $17 an hour, $18 an hour where I live, $19, $20 an hour. And it's not because that's the minimum wage here. That's not the minimum wage. It's because labor's in demand. Here's the thing, though.
There, but in some place where there's a labor surplus, it's not going to be that way, and they're going to drive wages down to like 50 cents.
They can in a competitive labor market, because anytime I can produce more in value than what you're paying me, there's an opportunity for another company to hire me and still make money while paying me a higher rate.
Right.
So it's essentially you can make the minimum wage whatever you want, but you can't make people hire at a wage higher than what they can produce in value. So you could say there's a $15 minimum wage, but if somebody if somebody only at the beginning of their career only produces $11 an hour in value for a company, you've just made it illegal for them to be hired. You haven't helped them. Well, I also kind of think of it that, frankly, it's like, it's my body, it's my life. If there's a company that wants to hire me for $4 an hour and I want to work for $4 an hour, it shouldn't be, well, I didn't get Adam's consent to that. Like, it shouldn't be up to anyone except the two parties involved, really. I think I know what's best for me better than what the government knows what's best for me, or what my neighbors know what's best for me. So I don't really support any minimum wage at all. To the extent there is one, I think it should be a non-binding, so below the market clearing wage, right? Just to ensure outlier cases don't slip through. But
so you're in favor of some minimum wage?
No,
not just abolishing
not really.
it. Okay, so you are in favor.
But
of
I'm saying
it.
I'm certainly right, in economics, a non-binding minimum wage is one that's below the market clearing rate, so it would basically never come into effect. And so I'm saying I think the federal $7.25 or whatever an hour is close to a non-binding wage at this point, in that the average market wage is so much higher than that in almost all of the entire country that it's basically a non-factor in most market decisions.
I get that. Sitch, you want to say something?
Well, I was going to say, I think looking at the minimum wage now could be a mistake, because right now the labor market is very different than it was pre-COVID. Demand for labor is so high for multiple reasons. So I'm not sure that there was really this massive markup for labor in a lot of places in the country pre-COVID. And I think the fact that when we look at like agricultural and construction, and we see how much of a reliance there is on illegal labor, to me shows you that there does need to be a need for a minimum wage.
But though that's because Americans don't want to do those jobs.
But they would if they got paid whatever the job was worth to do.
But I don't think that's true, because they have other options. They have a high reservation wage because of the welfare state.
Well, no, but that's what it means. Like, if we had 0 illegal immigrants, then they would have to pay whatever the market demands they pay to make people do those jobs, period, right?
But what I'm saying is that those jobs would, if the wage you tried to make them pay is higher than what they actually were worth, the jobs would simply not exist. Yeah, no employer is going to do charity.
No. But what I'm saying is, like, okay, so if you believe in how like the markets work naturally, then you would have to accept that what it would mean would be that agricultural or certain other products would just have to cost more to get people to do those jobs, because otherwise they just wouldn't exist. Like, if they can't pay someone enough to pick the fruit, then what happens? It just doesn't, they're not going to sell the product at all, and then the product ceases to exist.
Yes, but that's what would happen in some cases. I mean, you just end up running places out of business if you raise the minimum wage above what it's actually profitable.
No, but what I'm saying is that
employ people at.
A lot of these agricultural producers, they only exist currently the way they do because they're basically paying people sub minimum wage because they're illegal labor.
But what's the downside of that exactly?
Well, no, my point is that to me, that's an example of why you need a minimum wage, because that shows you that, yes, businesses will take advantage of people when they have the opportunity.
So that the problem is that's only because those are unskilled laborers with limited English. So what they can produce at most places is very limited. But what I'm saying is, even in the absence of a minimum wage, I wouldn't have to accept dirt pay. Let's say let me put this in a very understandable example. My first job was at a Subway sandwich shop. Imagine that I, Brad, the 18-year-old, was capable of producing $15 an hour in value for an employer. And my job back then paid me like $9 an hour. And if I had stayed there more than 6 months or whatever, what I could have done is, they couldn't have just paid me $8 an hour for the rest of my life or cut my wages or whatever, because I can produce $15 an hour in value in that kind of retail food environment. The Dunkin' across the street can make money by hiring me at $10 or $12 an hour. and still get that surplus value, right? That $3, $4, and make more money by hiring me away. So through labor markets functioning, the competing for labor, my productivity and my wages will closely correlate over time. You see people show these graphs showing that they don't correlate anymore. Those graphs are completely bogus because they ignore non-wage compensation. And the reason those lines started to diverge is because of the employer healthcare mandate. So now a huge percentage of compensation comes through the form of in-kind benefits like healthcare, health insurance. And so it doesn't show up in that graph. But your productivity is what determines what you're ultimately paid in a competitive labor market,
Okay, well,
not
the minimum wage.
We have some audience questions for Brad.
Wait. I have to address this. Because my problem I have with this is that, like, Dunkin' Donuts across the street doesn't, it's not have omniscience knowledge. Like, they don't know. Like, if you say, oh, I work at Subway across the street and I, produce more than I get paid, let me work here and I'll do the same for you if you pay me a little bit more. Like, the owner of Dunkin' Donuts doesn't know that. And he's not necessarily going to say, oh, okay, I know that you're a good worker, worth it, so I'm going to make sure to pay you extra. So then Subway says, oh, well, we need to pay you a little bit extra just to keep you here. No, Dunkin' Donuts not going to know that. And even if that happens, Subway is probably going to be like, okay, bye. We'll just get someone else to make the fucking sandwiches. Like, that's why I think this is a little.
No, but that's the thing is when the Dunkin' Donuts needs more laborers, right? And they put out the $8 an hour and they're not getting any takers because I'm already earning $8 an hour. They got to put out the $9 an hour before I apply. Right.
If there's a dearth of labor, yes. Right.
But there's always a demand for labor. There's always people changing and losing jobs, new jobs being added. And obviously labor markets are hotter at some times than others. And it's better to be a worker in a hot labor environment than in a weak labor environment. But that competitive cycle of the market functioning for labor is always happening. And that's why wages, they might go up and down, but they trend towards productivity. So if you want to help people, you can't do it by passing a law mandating that they need to be paid more. That will just have second order consequences. And I don't think it's a net benefit.
Yeah, no,
I think you have to help people increase their productivity. And then over time, that will increase their compensation.
It will have second order consequences, but it's a trade-off, and it's kind of ironic because people were very against the COVID payments, and I think the COVID payments are part of what made labor kind of have more power in the first place. And it's kind of funny because Adam talks about UBI, and I think UBI would give labor a lot more power in the first place. And maybe if you have UBI, you get rid of the minimum wage and things of that nature. But I think it's difficult when before COVID, to my understanding, labor was basically, for the last 10, 20, years, was an all-time low in terms of having power in the market, and demand for labor was never particularly high until recently. So
maybe, well, I guess when we're talking about labor, are we talking about unions or are we talking about laborers?
No, I'm talking about just
two very different things.
I'm talking about non-management.
Supply and demand. If there's a lot of supply.
Yeah, so I think that premise isn't true. I think in the pre-COVID economy, we had like a 3.5% unemployment rate, 3.7, 3.9 or something like that.
That's low.
That's very low, which means that there's not a lot of unemployed workers sitting around. There is workers are in demand. I think that I guess I don't think the premise there is.
We have to go back and
wages are pushing up, but
what were the wages, the direction of wages pre-COVID? But
let's we have a bunch of questions for Brad. Yeah, so but let's do like a legit MMT debate of a wage debate. It'd be fun.
I didn't even know we were talking about that. I'll have to come back and we'll have a whole.
No. We love talking about this stuff. I don't think Sitch has even heard my ideas on split minimum wage. I'm just kind of forming them. Like, one of the principles of the show here is kind of truth comes from argument among friends. So
I do love
really
that. I do believe in a free marketplace of ideas, not censorship.
Hi, you just listened to a clip from the Sitch and Adams show. If you like what you heard, you can listen to our live show right here on this channel on Sunday, starting at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And if you want, you can super chat us. We read $20 and up super chats on the show and then do a follow-up stream on the following Tuesday where we read the rest of the unread super chats and interact with fans of the show. Subscribe to this channel right here to listen to the live show or to listen to more of our awesome clips.